I always have a pocket knife in my pocket and I use it most days. I really like these Opinel knives. They come in different sizes and they look good and they feel good and they're cheap. But they are made in France and I recently waited 3 months for them to be restocked in our local hardware shop. And then when I did get another one to give away as a present, I promptly lost my own one. So all in all, I started wondering how difficult it might be to make my own pocket knife. These ones are deceptively simple, but in reality they are actually sophisticated and superbly made. They have a locking collar, a high carbon steel blade, a one-piece beechwood handle, and a pleasing shape. And they are finished perfectly, as well as some neat engraving. So, inspired by them, I came up with my own, much cruder, chunkier design. Again, a one-piece handle with the blade tucked into a slot. Its main downside is that it has a lever sticking out even when it's closed. On the other hand, it has just 4 parts. An Opinel knife has 5 parts, and this one might have 12 or more, and this one is just silly. My knife needs a wooden handle, a one-piece blade and lever, a hinge pin, and a stop pin. 4 parts to get right. Now it doesn't have a lock, so the blade would need to be held fairly tightly, hence the lever to help open it. Actually, the law doesn't like knives with locks on them anyway, here, but this isn't for carrying around in public. It's a farmer's knife, or a workshop knife, or a gardener's knife, something completely simple, utilitarian, practical. So I've made a start on one of the 4 components, the wooden handle part. It's a simple enough barrel shape, or cigar shape, so I should be able to make it on the lathe. It will need slots cut in it somehow, but first of all, can I make the basic shape quickly enough and finish it well enough? So I resurrected my old copy lathe, because if I'm going to figure out all the stages of making a knife, I might as well make a few of them at the same time. That's what I'm thinking. Again, it's a very crude construction, because what else would you expect from me? But it cost almost nothing, because it's made of pipe and pipe fittings that slide inside each other. Now I made it to fit this old woodworking lathe. The pipes are tightened down onto the lathe bed using just 2 ring bolts that pass through the bed. Okay, it was a bit stiff and somehow quite sloppy at the same time, but just has to slide in 2 directions. Slide smoothly would be good, but as long as there isn't too much slop, then it should work. Now I made this thing to fit my Cress router, but I don't want to take that off my CNC machine where it lives, so I made some new mounts for a little DeWalt palm router. Nothing fancy, of course. Remember, this is the shoestring channel. I bought a ball-nosed milling bit to go into the curves of the shape. It has a 6mm shank like the ones I use on my CNC machine. But of course, I'd forgotten that DeWalt use a 1/4-inch collet. You'd think that they would give us Europeans the option, wouldn't you? Very frustrating. I remember now why I've never ever used that router. I did try widening the slot in the side of the ring, but that didn't work. And nor did wrapping tape around the shaft. Obviously, that would be foolish even to try, wouldn't it? But I was able to order a new collet ring, and eventually it arrived in a large box for some reason. I set up the router so the bit was in line with the centres, and put in a piece of red deal, which is what we call imported pine. couldn't remember which direction works best, but it turns out to be from left to right. Turning this nut a little each time allows me to cut a little deeper each pass without the danger of it digging in, because the movement is limited by the nut. Anyway, it worked, not very smoothly. So I chose a different pulley ratio, sped up the lathe basically, and that helped. So I turned it up again. Not smooth, but flat and even, and easily sanded smooth. So I was able to turn a straight round shape, which is a good start, but that's not quite what I want for my knife handles. So I took my profile shape from my drawing and put 3 of them together and cut out a template of their silhouette from 4mm plate and mounted that on the back of the copy lathe. So now the follower can't go any further forward than the template allows. A few hesitant passes and the shape of 3 handles begins to emerge. How exciting! Then I cut too deep and had to start again. This time with some white deal, which is very quick growing local cheap spruce, which is impossible to finish because it's so soft, but it's good to experiment with. I had to adjust the template quite a bit because I want the final turnings to be not just the right shape, but also the right diameter. They all need to be the same size and shape for the next stage, which is going to be setting up some sort of jig, I hope, to hold them while I cut precise slots in them somehow. That's the plan anyway. In the meantime, I tried some locally grown Chilean myrtle. Thanks Rosie and Mike. And some Douglas fir with varying success. I think the myrtle could work well, but it splits badly, so I'd need to saw it up into blanks soon after harvest and let it dry like that and hope it doesn't split. If I can find something suitable, it would be nice to be able to make the penknives out of local timber, wouldn't it? And after a while, they started coming out better and faster. Still need to get better at sanding, and I need an extractor, but it's not too bad for a start. But what about the ends? See, they're tricky. I could use some sort of cutter blade on the lathe to cut them off, but when you make 3 at a time, how do you stop everything falling out when you make the first cut? I think sanding them is the only way to get them neat, you know. I could sand them freehand, I suppose, but I couldn't do that consistently. So I decided that I needed a jig to hold the pieces firmly up to the sander. But of course I've made a shape that's hard to hold, so a jig won't be easy. So I took my original 2D drawing, imported it into Tinkercad and FreeCAD, and tried to turn it into a 3D shape. I struggled to do that. I'm sure there is a way, but I couldn't find it. So after many hours of frustration, I just drew it out again in Tinkercad. Much simpler, Tim. Actually, I only needed to draw half of it out, and then I pushed a button and it rotated the shape around the right-hand axis. And just like that, I had a 3D model of my handle. Wow. Go on, watch it again. So then I had something that represented the real handle shape. And I was able to lower that into a solid block shape. Remove one from the other, which is how Tinkercad works. And there was a hollow that should be able to accept the real thing in real life. So I printed that out. For some reason, the printer filled in most of the holes in the design. Curious, moody things, printers, but amazing. And there's my jig with a toggle clamp to hold the piece in. The jig has 2 holes in the base, one for sanding each end. They engage with a pin at a critical point from the sander. So once I've set one end and sanded it around, I can swap the jig around without removing the handle, and the handle should get sanded to the correct length each time. Pretty cool, huh? Right then, quite a lot of work in all that, but I think they look okay. Now I really don't know if I can get the next stages to work. Cutting the slots and drilling the holes somehow. Making, hardening and sharpening a blade somehow. And fitting them all together, but at least I have a few blanks now to practice on. So I'm quite excited.